Good morning from Lindale, Texas. Hey, hope you're having a great day so far. So this morning is Proverbs 18, and the topic is 5 earmarks of a fool, all from Proverbs 18. But before we get started, if you could, just click on like below this video, or also, in addition, subscribe. That would be great to have you on board. Proverbs chapter 18. So 5 earmarks of a fool. Of course, Proverbs deals a lot with the contrast between the fool and the wise. The fool is the one who doesn't fear God. The wise is the one who does fear God and makes wisdom his primary pursuit in this life. So that's where the Proverbs land on the subject of foolishness. So let's look at 5 earmarks of a fool. Number 1, in verse 1, he isolates himself. The verse says, a man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all sound judgment. He isolates himself. And it's clear from verse 1 why he isolates himself. He isolates himself because he has his own desires, his own wishes, his own commandments that he's internalized within himself. Those are the things he wants to follow, and he doesn't want to follow the advice or the input or the feedback or the influence of anybody else. He isolates himself and he seeks his own desire, and in doing so, he rages against all wise judgment, because it's just not wise to isolate. It's just not wise to think of myself as an island that can direct all the affairs of my own life. That's an earmark of a fool. Earmark number 2 is in verse 2 of Proverbs 18. A fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart. So a fool has no delight in understanding. In other words, he doesn't have any delight in learning, because the only way you can understand is for one to be teachable and wanting to learn, wanting to listen, wanting to pay attention, and really kind of be that type of a person who is quicker to ask a question than he is to give an answer. And of course, his real desire is to express his own heart. He expresses it to himself, within himself, and he expresses his own heart and his opinions to others. Doesn't bother listening to them, but he'll share anything that he thinks with them. Kind of reminds me of the social media keyboard warriors that are out there. And, individuals that really have no right to speak on a certain subject from terms of experience or what they really know about it, but they've got an opinion about everything, and they want to make sure that the rest of the universe knows what that opinion is. And so those are the keyboard warriors, waging war against all contrary opinions to their own. A fool, that's what they do. They have no delight in understanding. Earmark number 2. Earmark number 3 is a combination of verses 6 and 7, so we'll read them together. We've titled this, His Mouth Gets Him Into Trouble. His mouth gets him into trouble. A fool's mouth gets him into trouble. Verses 6 and 7. A fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for blows. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. So what a fool is characterized by is loose lips that sink ships, or just being a loudmouth person. Instead of being the James 1 person who is swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, he's somebody who is very slow to hear, he's very quick to speak, and he's very quick to be angry. And so he just says what is on his mind. He thinks that's a virtue, to say everything that's in his heart at the time. And he makes very foolish choices as to when and to whom he should share these things. And so his lips call for blows. Somebody's going to hit him in the mouth because of what he's just said. And others who do the same thing, those words become snares to their own souls, and they end up being tripped up by their own words. And so this is unfortunate. We have to be careful about how we speak, don't we? Ephesians 4 gives us that wonderful, wonderful description of how we ought to choose our words. Let no unwholesome word proceed out of your mouth, but only what is good for the purpose of necessary edification, that it might minister grace to the hearers. So I think before I speak. That's the idea. Think before I speak, and I decide what to say on the subject of whether or not this is going to build up the people that are listening to me. But a fool doesn't think that way at all. A fool just shares whatever is on his mind, stream of consciousness words, and it always gets him into trouble. Okay, the next one is in verse 12, and we're entitling this, he gives in to pride. He succumbs to pride. He lays down his life before pride. Pride is his thing. And so verse 12 says, before destruction, the heart of man is haughty, and before honor is humility. So before a man is destroyed, you can tell what has led up to it. It's haughtiness, it's pride. And that the opposite is, when you see somebody honored, you can tell what leads up to that. It's humility. But the fool is proud. The fool, in his own haughtiness, in his own self-importance, in his own sense of ego, lives that way, and destruction will be as a result. And he gives in to pride. One of the 7 deadly sins listed in Proverbs chapter 6 that we've talked about in the past. And then the last of the 5 characteristics, or earmarks of a fool, as we've called them, also 2 verses 13 and 17. See if you can identify what we might describe these characteristics, or this characteristic, as being. Verse 13, he who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. Verse 13, he who answers a matter before he hears it, it's folly and shame to him. And then verse 17, the first one to plead his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. So in the first verse, verse 13, he's not really heard the whole set of facts. He only knows part of the story, and he has insufficient knowledge to be able to render a judgment, but he goes ahead and answers it anyway. He goes ahead and gives his opinion as to what should be done. A lot of bad advice that one person might give to another comes from this tendency to answer a matter before one hears it. And so this is the part of the characteristic, the earmark of a fool, listed in verse 13. Verse 17, a little different twist. The first one to plead his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. It's the same kind of thing. Somebody comes to you and tells you their story and the thing that has happened to them and what so-and-so did to them, and it just seems right. And you want to just get on the phone and call that offender, and you want to ream him out, and you want to get him corrected and all that kind of stuff, until you actually go and examine the situation a little more thoroughly, and you discover, wait a minute, there are 2 sides to every story. Let's find out what the other side is before we render any kind of a decision or judgment. And so the first one to plead his cause seems right. Yeah, that seems right. Wow, that's terrible. Until his neighbor comes and examines him, bringing out other nuances of the story, and maybe even changing the opinion of the initial decision or judgment. So what does this have in common, these 2 verses? Well, this fool, this earmark of a fool, is that he makes judgment without all the facts. He makes judgments without all the facts. Oh, we really need more information most of the time, don't we? And so we should be, again, swift to hear, slow to speak, and I would add, slow to decide. Let's just wait. Let's wait until more of the facts come in, and then we'll be able to render a more accurate judgment. These are all earmarks of a fool. In Proverbs chapter 18, these help us identify what living a foolish life is like. He isolates himself. He only values his own opinion. His mouth gets him into trouble. He gives in to his pride, and he makes judgments without all of the facts. Of course, the opposite to all of these things is what helps us to describe the earmarks of the wise man. So that's a study that we can do, and seeing what the reverse or the opposite of each of these is. Again, please go ahead and click on the like button or the subscribe button, and we just love to have you on board as we continue with these Take 5 moments, or Take 10 with Bill Holdridge. Take 10. Don't even know the name of my own program. Anyway, God bless you all in Jesus' name.